every boardroom
Offshore rigs,
debate.
onshore problems. Here's where the map turns mechanical. Platforms that were planted in water now stare at land creeping toward them. Fixed jackets were calculated to a datum engineers took as steady. That datum moved. A few centimeters, a year sounded harmless in a meeting. Out here, it's a ladder rung shaved off every season until the service boat can't clear the keel. Fixed platforms hate falling water. Their legs don't grow. The air gap widens, the sea floor rises to meet approach channels, scour patterns change. The Helidic isn't the issue. The problem is groceries, people, and pipe. What it takes to keep pressure under control and wells on decline curves, not cliff edges. A smart field is dumb without access. Floating units should handle this, right? Up to a point. In the south, with depth to spare, tension legs and semisubs adjust. But in the shallow middle and the north, floats become prisoners of draft. If a barge can't reach you, what does it matter that your mooring lines can pay out? The problem isn't buoyancy, it's the road to the dock that vanished under reeds. Service vessels tell the story in drafts and detours. Crews used to run straight shots from base to platform. Now they thread newly cut channels that silt between tides that don't exist, because this isn't an ocean. Every hot week thickens the soup. The north adds ice to insult. When winter edges in, thinner water freezes faster and harder, grabbing at hulls and pushing ice plates against structure in angles nobody modeled when the bottom was lower. A maintenance superintendent in the middle step flips a whiteboard to show the new normal. 2-week cycles turn to 3 because the cut-ahead dredger needs an extra pass. A pump motor that used to ride a workboat takes a day on gravel roads, then 2 skiffs stitched together like a catamaran to spread weight. He keeps a log of lost hours that used to be weather and is now water. A micro-story that repeats across companies. We truck what we used to ship. Channels aren't just grooves in mud. They're cost curves. Cut them and you pay. Don't cut them and you pay more when a shut-in ripples through a monthly target. Accountants argue with engineers over what counts as maintenance and what slips into capex. Auditors arrive with impairment tests, asking whether a platform reachable only 12 months ago still meets the access assumption that underwrote its reserves. Risers feel the change too. Lower water means different angles, new stresses at clamps, altered fatigue lives. Sand waves migrate across cables that once sat in calmer beds. Cathodic protection plans written for one bathymetry face another. Small variances add up until a risk officer signs off on inspection intervals that double, with divers and ROVs booked like scarce aircraft. The spreadsheet smiles less each quarter. In the north, ice multiplies maintenance. Shallowing creates contact a meter earlier in the season. Ice shove pushes on piles and conductor casings longer. Work windows compress. When you lose draft, you don't just lose summer, winter hardens around you. A rig crew jokes they can nearly walk supplies in by January. Nobody laughs long. Walkable ice isn't the friend you think it is when a pressure ridge aims for your legs. Project managers learn a new verb, to maroon. A skid-mounted compressor meant for a satellite well pad is offloaded 30 kilometers short of plan because the landing barge can't clear the bar. Temporary roads snake across hardpan that turns to glue when it rains. Contractors add clauses for hydraulic variability, a polite way to say, we'll try, but charge extra when the sea says no. Write-down risk hangs over it all. Booking reserves assumes access, flow, and market. Lose anyone for long enough, and banks haircut numbers they once took on faith. National oil companies pivot their rhetoric from expansion to stewardship, from step-outs to infields, not because geology changed, but because logistics did. A field that looked like a 25-year friend becomes a 15-year compromise with long weekends of downtime. You see it in procurement. Spare parts caches swell because just-in-time died on the last low-water season. Helicopter hours rise, but rotors can't lift pipes, and weather still calls the shots. Amphibious craft get trialed, tracked machines that crawl flats and splash into channels. They save days, and then they break because salt and sand don't care about your innovation deck. Someone draws a line item for amphib fleets. It's progress and an admission at once. Meanwhile, the offshore-nearshore blur grows. Tiebacks lengthen to reach more certain waters. Modular causeways extend from shore like tentative fingers. Every meter added means more exposure to storm fetch and ice shove, and more maintenance. But the calculus feels cleaner. Bet on steel you control rather than water you don't. Production curves whisper the truth early. Wells behave, systems don't. The decline isn't geological, it's logistical. Missed interventions stack. Scale you meant to treat last month reaches a threshold you don't want. A pump runs long past its design because the part is on a highway. Quiet barrels disappear, never declared, never scandalous, just gone in the noise of a quarter. In meeting rooms, executives slice portfolios by a new criterion: water dependence. Projects that live or die by a gauge slip to the right on Gantt charts. Sponsors say prudence. Engineers hear retreat. Shareholders ask why guidance keeps shifting. The answer is a sentence nobody wants to sell. The platform didn't move, but the sea did. Across the eastern shore, while dredgers grind and pilots squint, another set of assets faces the same slow verdict. Not platforms, but piers. Not risers, but rails on concrete leading to air. Unknown to them, a different kind of steel is about to learn what stranded means. Ports on dry land, the logistics unravel. Across the eastern shore, concrete meets air. Aktau's cranes trace arcs over water that keeps ducking away. Turkmenbashi's new terminals, opened with speeches and brass bands, now check drafts like weather. Baku built Aliat down the coast as a fix for old city constraints, but even a modern port can't outtalk a falling gauge. The sea doesn't negotiate. It recedes, and every centimeter shuffles schedules, shaves payloads, and turns promises into IOUs. Ports are choreography disguised as steel. Berths, pilots, tugs, customs, trucks, every step timed to the minute. Shallowing breaks timing first. A ferry slated for a 5.5-meter approach finds 5.1 on the sounder. Lightering eats hours. The queue grows. The captain who planned a night arrival lingers offshore until dawn dredgers clear a shoal that wasn't on last week's chart. Dispatchers rewrite rotations on the fly. What used to be reliable becomes a series of ifs. Dredging becomes the heartbeat. It's no longer a seasonal tidy-up. It's continuous therapy. Cut the approach channel, sculpt the turning basin, extend the pocket at berth 3 another 20 meters, then check it again after a hot, windy week. Budgets swell. The price of keeping depth starts to rival the projects that justified the port. Executives approve emergency campaigns so often the word stops meaning anything. Crews work nights to chase a moving bottom with a tired cut ahead and a fuel truck that arrives late because the access road is soft. Breakwaters were built for waves, then forced to deal with land. As the shoreline steps back, their angles catch more silt. The protected calm they create turns into a silt trap, so engineers draw up extensions, longer arms, new knuckles, to redirect flow and steal a few extra centimeters where pilots need swing room. Piles march seaward like cautious scouts. Each meter added must prove it can hold a depth that won't stick around. Aliat was supposed to be the answer for Baku's congestion. It is, up to the point where drafts wobble. The Ro-Ro ramps are rated for trucks and rail wagons, but an inch of misalignment at the bow becomes hours of delay with forklifts and crane slings. Crews improvise with steel shims and fresh asphalt, the kind of patchwork that works once and then fails on a hotter day. Schedulers start padding transit times. What used to be a 22-hour promise across the lake becomes 30, then, weather and water permitting. The middle corridor's pitch, China to Europe without Russia, depends on those hours. Shave a day at sea and you win a shipper. Lose a day to draft and the tariff spreadsheet no longer smiles. Rail rates climb to cover idle cranes and dredger bills. A container that should have rolled from wagon to deck waits on a chassis because the ship can't risk a fully loaded approach. The corridor's map lines don't show the mud under berth 5. Then come the micro-stories that chew at confidence. In Turkmenbashi, a coastal freight ship plays tag with the shoreline. Each month, its captain ties up farther down the makeshift pier extensions, wood, then steel, then a welded ladder of platforms. Customs officers follow by truck, setting up folding tables and stamping papers in the wind because the permanent shed now faces dry land. A routine that used to fit inside a neat perimeter sprawls toward the retreating sea. Insurance reads all of this in claims. Variable draft clauses that started in upstream contracts slide into port liability. Underwriters ask for fresh surveys every week, then every 3 days during heat waves. A handful step back from hull cover for Caspian Ro-Ros altogether, citing hydrographic volatility. Premiums creep, then jump after a series of scrapes and bent propellers in the shallows. Port authorities hold press conferences to reassure. Traders hold back bookings because spreadsheets aren't swayed by press rooms. Customs is a quiet casualty. Their throughput KPIs were built on fixed berths and predictable handoffs. Now they chase cargo into parking lots and temporary yards thrown up as staging. Paper trails lengthen. Mistakes multiply when a railcar's seal is broken outside a fence line, so boxes can be repacked to meet a new weight limit for a shallow approach. Auditors arrive with clipboards and cameras. Fines follow. Shippers swallow them because the alternative is rolling a load for another week. Port managers learn to talk like river pilots. They read wind forecasts, watch satellite altimetry ticks, and text each other about suspicious sand accumulations at buoy 14. A night shift chief at Actau keeps a Polaroid of the same pier taken every quarter. The dates look like a time-lapse of absence. He doesn't show it on tour. He shows the dredger catalog, the tender for amphibious yard tractors, the sketch of a floating pontoon berth that could ride the line down a little longer. Investors who flew in for ribbon cuttings now get escorted to control rooms with wall screens. Live AIS feeds, draft boards, crane cycles. The numbers still look busy. The trend lines don't. A consultant clicks through slides on resilience investments, movable piers that bolt to new footings, telescoping gangways, modular caissons, amphib fleets to shuttle between stranded hardstands and water that can still take a hull. Every fix buys time. None reverse the graph. On the railheads feeding the ports, schedulers juggle hedges, reserve extra wagons because two ferries might miss the tide that isn't and arrive together tomorrow. Contract backup storage because imported goods can't sit on asphalt at 40 degrees. Offer discounts to shippers who accept split loads to lighten drafts, then charge more when those splits multiply handling. Margin thins into noise. A corridor that sells reliability now sells managed variability. The harshest shift is cultural. Port towns grew up on a rhythm of arrivals and departures. Kids time their days to horns and wakes. Now a long east wind exposes ribs of old jetties and leaves gulls walking where they used to wheel. Cafes that served crews on tight turnarounds switch to daytime trade because nights go quiet when ships anchor offshore waiting for a dredger to finish. An economy built on predictability relearns patience, and patience doesn't pay rent. Governments reframe. They call the dredging surge modernization, the pier extensions, capacity upgrades. Press kits feature renderings of future basins with deeper pockets. In back rooms, they approve budget lines that quietly admit the truth. Ports are fighting a slope they can't flatten. A slope measured in centimeters per year that converts steel into stranded sculpture if money blinks. And still operations continue. That's the stubbornness of logistics. You keep moving things as the ground moves under you. You buy time with diesel and cutters, bolt-on platforms and new breakwater teeth. You convince yourself the next season will be kinder. Then a hot month steals back your gains, and a tug spins its prop in brown water that feels like it's thickening by design. The sea isn't angry. It's just leaving, and the ports are learning how to work on dry land. Naval shadows, militaries on a shrinking stage. While ports chased water with dredgers and pontoons, grey hulls adjusted to a theater that kept shrinking under their keels. 5 flags share this inland sea, and every patrol, every exercise, every quiet intercept now plays out in lanes narrowed by sandbars and receding shoals. The Caspian's armies didn't plan for a stage that retreats. Russia carries the largest fleet, corvettes with cruise missiles, patrol boats, fast attack craft, homeported along a coastline where the channels twist through a delta that changes shape between surveys. Their doctrine says deterrence and counter-terror, but their watch lists include terminals, platforms, and the railheads that suddenly matter more than piers. When ice thickens early in the north, they switch from wake-chasing to ice-breaking escorts, clearing access for supply barges that can still move and pushing pressure ridges off moorings that weren't designed to be bulwarks. Iran's navy sits at the southern depth, where draft isn't the daily crisis but scrutiny is. Their patrols run longer arcs, and their tenders linger near offshore structures that double as national assets and leverage. Official communiques read security and ecology in the same paragraph. Unofficially, commanders pace the line between presence and provocation, knowing a camera phone can turn a rendezvous into a diplomatic flare. Sanctions tighten procurement. Improvisation fills gaps. Refits stretch. Spare parts get cannibalized. and small craft carry a bigger share of duties along beaches that don't move like the north. Azerbaijan puts speed at the center of its posture. Fast boats, coastal surveillance, drones that draw narrow tapestries over shipping approaches to Baku and Aliat. Exercises framed as counter-sabotage look a lot like insurance patrols for corridor infrastructure. Gas pipes ashore, oil lines west, and ferries that keep the middle corridors claim alive. Their Coast Guard learned to read the silt fans at the Kura's mouth by drone, updating pilots and patrol craft with images that make yesterday's chart feel like a rumor. Kazakhstan operates on the shelf's knife edge, where a patrol zone can turn into a mudflat in a season. Their small cutters and landing craft gained missions that used to be civilian, escorting service vessels through fresh-cut channels, marking temporary fairways with buoys. They move like chess pieces every few weeks. A deputy commander keeps a laminated depth board in his pocket. He checks it before approving an intercept that might strand a hull on the wrong side of a bar that didn't exist last winter. Turkmenistan built up fast in the 201s, new boats, new piers at Turkmenbashi, then found that speed meets physics when the approach silts and the outer berths need another cut. Their patrols pushed farther east and south to where water still favors a planing hull. When foreign survey ships appear near gas prospects, the patrol pattern tightens. Radio calls stay polite. The message is plain: the water may be shallow, but the watch is close. As channels narrow, encounters multiply. A fisherman drifts into a live exclusion zone because yesterday's marker stands on dry. A patrol tries to redirect without scraping a prop on a new bar. Gray zone incidents creep into logs. A service barge nudged by a fast boat, a quadcopter buzzing a platform camera, a second camera capturing the first. No one fires, everyone files. The temperature rises anyway because the lanes that once gave room for misreadings now pinch. Exercises become theater and shield. Russia drills amphibious landings on low, flat shores, saying anti-terror, showing reach. Iran practices mine countermeasures and boarding near approaches to their platforms, with clips that emphasize readiness and the right to inspect. Azerbaijan runs anti-sabotage drills in view of Aliat's berths, streaming snippets that reassure shippers while reminding watchers that corridor assets are guarded. Kazakhstan rehearses ice operations with cutters creeping through narrow slots, a choreography that doubles as training for winters arriving sooner and longer. Turkmenistan stages intercepts in clear sight of offshore workboats, a message to neighbors and contractors: we're here. Insurance reads all of it in premiums. Every exercise near terminal tacks a few basis points onto cargo cover. A handful of foreign insurers have already walked from certain classes on the Caspian, citing combined weather, draft, and political risk they can't model cleanly. Those who stay ask for AIS discipline, escort logs, and fresh hydrographic notes before they sign. One underwriter joked in a closed call that they now price sand to hull proximity. The joke didn't travel well. Basing adapts to water retreat. Piers get lengthened, floating pontoons bolt to old hardstands, shallow draft patrol boats replace deeper steel in northern detachments. Across the sea, surveillance gets smarter to offset where hulls can't go, shore-based radars nested with drones and satellites, feeding fusion rooms that look like air traffic control for a lake without tides. The paradox is simple. As the sea shrinks, visibility grows, and with it, the chance that a routine run looks like a taunt on someone else's screen. The legal frame, no foreign navies, keeps outside stabilizers at a distance. In theory, that lowers risk. In practice, it traps problems inside a bowl, with 5 actors forced to balance escort duty for oil and gas with the posture that keeps neighbors cautious. When a patrol shifts to cover dredger conv, another lane goes unmarked for a night. A fishing skiff wanders through. A fast boat investigates. Radios crackle in 3 languages. Cooler heads prevail. The margin for error felt larger when water did. Security premiums seep into everything that moves. A Roro run adds an escort because an exercise notice popped up near the approach. A platform delays a crew change until the patrol schedule flips to a friendlier sector. A pipeline welding barge makes an extra stop at dusk to wait for a cutter to clear a reported shoal that might also be a camera. Traders hear temporary adjustments and push discounts into their offers. The volatility tax isn't just draft, it's attention. Military briefings now start with hydrology, depth at the inner fairway, sand accumulation at buoy lines, ice onset probabilities given this week's temperatures. The officers still speak in bearings and knots, but their world tilts on centimeters per year. They didn't choose to be stewards of access, yet that's what the job became, safeguarding the paths that keep economies liquid in a bowl that's slowly drying. And then, in finance towers far from the quay, the whispers start. When patrols hug terminals, when escorts shadow ferries, when exercises map onto cargo lanes, traders notice. They don't need a skirmish to mark up risk. They need a pattern, and patterns
the price
are forming
of evaporation
in water that traders, insurers, ratings. In trading rooms, the Caspian's falling line doesn't look like water. It looks like basis. A quiet spread opens between what a cargo should fetch on paper and what it actually sells for when the ship can't reach the berth on a Tuesday. That gap has a name, basis risk, and on the Caspian it rides the weather, the river gates, and a draft board that keeps losing numbers. Contracts used to assume depth. Now they assume arguments. Charter parties add variable draft alongside force majeure, lake and stretch, lightering clauses multiply pages. A trader who once booked a lift with a phone call now flips to an appendix checking soundings from Monday's survey, then asks if the dredger finished its second cut. The answer decides whether a cargo loads at full parcel or trims to clear a bar that nobody saw last summer. Demurrage models weren't built for this. They priced storms, union actions, fog. They didn't price a week of heat that boils 3 centimeters off a turning basin. Suddenly, a day rate that looked steep becomes cheap compared to a shut-in. One missed window cascades, storage fills, new purchases roll, cash that should rotate sticks on water that isn't there. Desk heads start padding time and chopping volume. They call it prudence. P&L calls it shrink. Microstory, a medium-sized trader in Baku lines up a 70,000-ton parcel to sink with a refinery turn in the Med. The ship arrives light for safety, plans to top up after dredging. The cutter breaks a gearbox. The channel stays tight. The trader faces a choice, sail short and buy makeup barrels at market highs, or wait and pay 5 days demurrage. One phone call flips a month's payroll. He sails. The spread eats his bonus. Insurers speak in exclusions now. Hull and machinery underwriters demand weekly draft attestations. P&I clubs raise deductibles where approach channels show silt spikes on recent surveys. A few foreign carriers exit RoRo and small tanker classes for the basin, citing hydrographic and operational volatility they can't model. Those who remain ask for escorts near dredging zones and proof of recent soundings before they bless an approach. Premiums climb in quiet quarter points that add up by year's end. Ports push back with data, new bathy scans, AIS heat maps proving safe passages. Insurers nod and still add a surcharge for proximity to shifting shoals. One broker jokes that the market is pricing sand like weather. Clients don't laugh. They pay and pass the cost downstream, where it thins margins on cargoes already discounted for delay risk. Ratings agencies weren't watching the waterline. Then draft crept into cash flows. Sovereigns built budgets on hydrocarbon exports that assumed a tempo of liftings. Start missing sailings and you don't miss a statistic, you miss hard currency. Analysts begin to blend hydrology with macro, Volga inflows, heat anomalies, dredging capex, and port reliability feed spreadsheets that used to hold only price decks and production curves. Outlooks shift from stable to negative, watch not on scandal, but on centimeters. Bankers adopt a new ritual. Alongside reserves, audits, and offtake agreements, they ask for hydrologic risk memos. Borrowing bases for field finance include haircut tables keyed to draft thresholds. Lose half a meter at Aktau's approach, and your facility steps down 3%. Miss 2 consecutive quarters of scheduled liftings, and a covenanted cash sweep triggers. Lawyers who used to write around sanctions now write around silt. Shadow discounts creep into crude pricing. Caspian blends that rely on sensitive terminals trade $1 or $2 under cousins tied to resilient corridors. Gas contracts that lean on ferry legs build in tolerance bands for delivery windows, with penalties halved if draft dips below a published line. A quiet tiering emerges. Molecules with easy paths, molecules with hard ones, and a premium for anything nailed to steel that doesn't care about water. Traders get creative the way they always do. They preposition rail wagons to catch rolled cargo and sell optionality, Pay us to have space when your ship can't load. They sequence cargoes to bet on cooler weeks, front-loading the shoulder seasons and praying for a mild July. They stitch swaps to hedge delivery slippage, turning weather into a spread to be managed instead of a wound to be endured. Some make money, most survive. Risk managers find religion in satellites. They subscribe to altimetry feeds and grace-derived water storage estimates. A junior on one desk sets up alerts. If the line drops 3 centimeters in a week near key approach, ping the team. One Thursday ping saves a 7-figure demurrage bill. Word spreads. By quarter's end, raster images sit next to price charts on the morning call. The sea has a ticker now. Sovereigns try to steady nerves. Ministries announce dredging surges, new cutterheads, pontoon berths that can ride the decline another season. Ratings teams listen, then ask for delivery stats and realized depths versus promises. If numbers align, the outlook holds. If not, bond spreads whisper the verdict. A country can't narrate its way past a gauge. Parametric insurance glides in from climate finance. Policies trigger when river gauges upstream miss a release band or when satellite-measured sea level crosses a floor. Payouts arrive faster than traditional claims, smoothing cash for ports and shippers hit by a too-shallow week. Premiums aren't cheap, but they're easier to model than legal fights over navigational negligence when a prop kisses mud. The volatility tax lands everywhere. Exporters shave guidance because operational constraints. Importers add inventory to buffer missed ships, tying up capital. Lenders widen spreads. Insurers pad rates. The sum shows up at the pump and on utility bills months later, a thin film of Caspian evaporation on distant receipts. Nobody announces it, everyone pays it. Back on the desks, the lesson settles. Barrels in place don't spend, barrels delivered do. In a basin where the water keeps slipping away, delivery is the risk to price, to credit, to reputations. Traders can paper around a lot. They can't paper around a missing meter at the pier. And that's when the questions about reserves stop being geology and start being logistics math. The $20 trillion number, reserve math versus reality. Here's where the story shifts from waterlines to balance sheets. The Caspian's promise was sold in a headline, $20 trillion in hydrocarbons. Politicians like the sound, investors like the math, but reserves aren't treasure in a vault. They're conditional, priced, permitted, and reachable through infrastructure that the shoreline is quietly undermining. Start with the categories. Proven means you can produce it economically with current tech and current conditions. Probable needs confidence, not proof. Possible is a hope with data behind it. Those caveats matter when your access depends on a draft that's shrinking by centimeters a year. A barrel in place doesn't count if the workboat can't deliver the pump that keeps pressure where it should be. The boosters had help. New finds juiced the narrative, none louder than Iran's Chalous gas field. Early briefings pitched it as a crown jewel in the southern deep, thick columns, favorable structure, value talked up to around $5.4 trillion at the peak of enthusiasm. A number like that can move a budget and a bond spread. It also papers over the harder question: how much of that becomes booked reserves under rules that care about deliverability, not just geology? From their perspective, bankers didn't need to kill the dream, they just needed to haircut it. A loan officer flips through a field's data pack and lands on a page labeled Access. That page now includes water depth at the nearest approach, dredging frequency and cost, winter ice onset probabilities, and a sensitivity table for logistics interruptions. Move a cell by one shallow season, and the net present value slumps. Proven can slip to probable without a core sample changing. Field by field, the sensitivity bites. A mid-shelf oil project that depended on a modest service fleet now faces 2-hour detours through channels that clog after hot weeks. A gas tieback plan to a shore facility loses its window every August when the approach tightens. Intervention schedules stretch. Decline curves steepen, not because the reservoir turns sour, but because the kit can't arrive on time.